Okay, folks, we'll make a wee start here. My name is Paul Callahan, and I'm coordinating this webinar along with Kevin tonight. So I'd just like to welcome everyone here tonight. This is our ninth and final webinar in this series of the Club Coach Development Programme, and this is around the effectiveness of condition games. I know Kevin fairly well. He used to work with OCG for 9 years. He worked in a sports science role, supporting the work of the coaching and games department and trying to develop evidence-based coaching and practice. He's moved on now and he works now for the Sports Institute of Northern Ireland and a sports analysis role across the multiple sports, and he works with athletes competing at international and Olympic level. So I'm really looking forward to tonight's session. Before we start, can I remind participants that you can use the chat box to ask any questions, and if Kevin doesn't cover them during the night, we will answer them at the end. Keep your cameras off, please, just for anything to support bandwidth, and we're recording this presentation, and it will be available on our OCG website and the YouTube channel after the presentation. So I'll hand you over now to Kevin. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Paul, can you hear me okay? Yeah, just want to check.
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
Cheers, thank you. First of all, thanks to Ulster JF for the opportunity to present. It's been a while since I've actually worked in Ulster JF, 3 years, I think, at this stage. It's nice to come back and be able to contribute something. Yeah, as Paul sort of mentioned, I worked there for, I think it was 8-9 years in a sports science role, so not employed exactly like a lot of the coaches that are there, but I was there to sort of support a lot of their work. So I suppose from my point of view, it gave me a unique perspective on what we're trying to do. And sports science, I suppose, has got a bit of a reputation as being a physical development tool. There's an awful lot of emphasis around strength and conditioning, physio, nutrition, and a couple of other disciplines, but they're all about physical preparation. From my point of view, performance analysis actually exists to support technical and tactical development. And then you've obviously the psychology end of things, where you're supporting mental and emotional development of players as well. So sports science is a broad area. 20 years ago it was sports science. Now it's all the different disciplines, and you have to specialize in one. But that's just where we've gone to. So I suppose from that point of view, the brief tonight was the effectiveness of conditioned games, and I'm trying to look at it from a sports science point of view, but also taking into account some of the work that I have done with the guys in the coaching department in Ulster GA. To start off with, the first thing I suppose, when I got the brief, it was like, well, what are conditioned games? And the very first question I would ask myself, what defines a game? As we all do, we all go to Google and have a quick look to see what the definitions are. And there's a couple that stood out for me whenever they come up. First one being an activity that one engages in for fun or amusement, and the other one, a complete episode or period of play and a final result. So to me, within that, there are two really key statements that come out of that. The amusement or fun part of it being the first one that caught my eye, and the second one, the final result. So basically the last couple of words in each of those statements, they're the things that to me really define what a game is. Look, to be honest, the number one priority there for me is amusement and fun, because if people are having fun or enjoying it, then it's easier to try and get a message across. When we put the conditioned in there, and what do we mean by conditioned? To me, it's just rules. So conditioned games, I think conditioned games is essentially we look at Gaelic football or hurling, and we just try to bring new rules to it. So we're essentially creating another game with our own game. So the condition part of it, I suppose, is just something that's been tagged along to it. But realistically, anytime we use a conditioned game, we're creating a game of our own. We're creating a completely new game. Yes, it might be based in one of our games, but we are creating a new game. So I was trying to think, as I was doing it, how do we look at this sort of stuff? How do we try to put it into some sort of organizational area or field of continuum or whatever it might be? So if we work from left to right on this continuum, like technical skill practice is something that a lot of coaches from a very young age will try to tell players, when you go home, make sure you work on this, make sure you do this. If you have to use the wall, or use a parent or use a brother or sister or a friend to practice this skill, and that's all technical skill practice, which is probably at the left end of the continuum. when we come into a lot of those sort of early underage games, you'll have seen a lot of straight line drills, and everybody knows them. You know, the straight line drills where someone's working back and forward in a line, executing a skill, whatever it might be. It might be a solo and a hand pass off or whatever it is. But that's, you know, not as far to the left, but it's still to the left of that continuum. At the far right would be a full match. So a full match is where we are in terms of what we need as our skill set and our attributes. And condition games, to me, as you can see on that, condition games fills a fairly big, broad area of what it is, because a lot of what we do training-wise, without even realising it, is condition games. And before I move on, I just want to show you a couple of videos. Think about what you're looking at as we're playing it. Okay, so there's the same player involved in both those clips. First clip we looked at, clip 1, is James McCarthy doing basically skill practice by himself at the very left end of that continuum. So he's practicing the punt pass up against the wall by himself, working on the technical aspects of that skill. And in the right hand side, in the right hand clip 2, we're at the very right hand side of that continuum. So when he had to put that into match practice, how did that look, and what did it look like? So it's just, and these are clips I want you to keep in mind as we go through the next couple of slides. They'll pop up on the screen again. We'll probably not play them through, but it's just to keep in mind what you've seen there, and what we'll need to try and bring out through working with condition games. When I was trying to, and this isn't a mistake in my presentation before anyone thinks it is, this slide was in right at the start, but when I was trying to think, how do you visualize what we try to do with training and what we try to do to get a match performance, I was looking for a visualization or something that worked. And this yellow bar caught my eye. So the yellow bar that looks a wee bit like a funnel, that caught my eye. And the reason, if I click on to the next slide, you'll see, so for match performance on the right hand side, that's what we're trying to get. And if we think of this as almost like just a big mixing bowl, and we throw in all these different aspects, and there's more, so it's not everything, but if we just look at physical alone, we've got endurance, we've got speed, power, strength, flexibility, and more. Probably reaction time, agility needs to go in there. Right down to tactical, we need to look at positioning, reading of the game situation, game management, things like that can go in there. So these are all things that players need to develop, and need to develop on the training pitch, and we need to put them all in this big mixer to give what we get as a match performance. So the way I was thinking of that funnel, and then I was also thinking about it's a recipe. It's a recipe whenever you're cooking something. If you miss out on one of these things, the outcome at this side isn't going to be what you expected or what you needed. If one of these is poor, this isn't going to be what you needed. So you need to try and develop all these at the right level, to the right level, and to the right extent to make sure you get the full match performance. So if we think of these clips again, and I won't play them again because we have just played them a minute ago and we have seen them, I'm sure everybody remembers them. In the first video, so when he was kicking against the wall, how many of those ingredients that I've just talked about does he use? And for me, just doing a quick brainstorm, I was thinking from a technical point of view, it's skill execution of the kick pass and a little bit of handling. Tactical, there's not really anything. Not really any tactical development, not. From a physical point of view, there's a little bit of agility because he's having to bounce across to pick up a ball if it's not coming exactly where he thought, which also leads into a bit of reaction time. But not really much more. There's not a massive amount of strength or power or endurance or speed needed in that. From the mental point of view, there's a little bit of concentration needed, a bit of focus. If he's trying to work on a specific type of kick, then maybe there's a wee bit more from that point of view. From an emotional point of view, there's very little, nothing really. Then think about clip 2. So what all's needed in clip 2? So we'll go to the technical again. There's the kick pass, there's the handling, there's a bounce solo in there, there's the hand pass at the end. From the tactical point of view, he's thinking about positioning the teammates, the timing of his pass, the selection of his pass. Physically, there's speed, there's power, there's strength, all involved in there. From the mental point of view, again, that decision making, concentration and focus. You can see even from this picture, he's looking at the ball, he's tuned in, he's concentrating, he's focusing. Dublin more than likely had a plan for what was going to happen from the throw-in, so he's having to focus and concentrate on what he's going to do there. And from an emotional point of view, can you imagine the arousal levels at that stage of the game and how he's having to keep a lid on certain elements of that arousal to make sure he's focused on what he has to do? So the point of this was just to examine both extremities there. And I suppose the big question, and look, I suppose I know the answer. Can we jump straight from clip 1 to clip 2? Can we jump from practicing against a wall to creating a goal chance in an All-Ireland final from the throw-in? Look, I know, and I know everybody in this group who's attending knows that that's not the case. You can't do that. Absolutely, clip 1 has its place, even at the top level, even for James McCarthy. And that there's actually a good point in that around, we do a lot of recovery sessions these days and talk about doing a lot of recovery, and a lot of those are, we need to recover, we'll go for a light jog, or we'll do, something off the feet or whatever it is. Doing something like that against the wall, you're getting some extra skill work in, extra technical skill work in, but it's also very low load, so it can operate as a recovery session as well. So I think from a recovery point of view, a lot of people have got into the notion that it has to be all away from the pitch or away from ball work. It's a brilliant opportunity to work on subtleties of the technical skills. If you want to change something slightly in a kick pass, get them working on it. If you want to really develop working off both hands on a hand pass, get them working on it at a really low load. So that's me digressing slightly. But the point being that clip 1, it frees up a bit of bandwidth in players to just focus on those subtle aspects of skills. So why are conditioned games effective? The only activity, and this is stuff that we've done, stuff I did when I worked in Ulster J, we tried to actually look at some conditioned games, we tried to look at some straight line drills. Tony, Roger, and a lot of the other football coaches in there, Paul included, will have come up with drills that they have used and developed over the years, and we actually put GPS on a lot of the players just to see physically what matches up. The only activity that we ever come across that actually matched directly to playing a match was playing a match, and that's not rocket science. The problem with a lot of sports science and GA is the question's never been asked before or never been answered before. So we'll have to answer a lot of obvious questions through the science, but playing a match is the most effective way of hitting all those attributes. But what's the pitfall of that? If you're playing a full match in every training session, every player won't get sufficient exposure to all the attributes. And if you think in particular at anything below probably under 17 grade, you will get dominant players who will get loads and loads of ball contacts, they'll get loads and loads of running, and you'll have players who will be stuck in a corner and might be lucky to touch the ball once. Or if they're a cornerback, they might not even touch the ball. So playing full matches isn't the answer to developing the skill set for everybody. It is the most efficient way at replicating the physical demands at a certain stage. But in order to get a nice balance across the team and across all those attributes and skills, that's where we need to move towards conditioned games. So I'm going to throw up that word bandwidth. I've already used it. It's a computer term. It may have existed before that, but I know it as a computer term. I think I'm of that generation where a lot of stuff is related to computers. But bandwidth is just that what it says on the screen: the energy or mental capacity required to deal with a situation. So it's this idea of what a person or a player can deal with at any one time. If we think again of James McCarthy's clips, clip 1, very little bandwidth needed. So he's not having to focus on too many different cues or too many different triggers. It's literally just him, the ball, and the wall. So he can really focus on that kick. Clip 2, his bandwidth is probably at full capacity. He's at absolute full capacity at that stage. With all the different cues, all the different triggers, all the different movements, even stuff happening off the side of the pitch, all that sort of stuff is taking different little bits of his attention. Now, when it comes to conditioned games, the key to this is considering bandwidth. And what I mean by that is making sure that the game's pitched at the right level, that we maximise the bandwidth available. So whatever a player is capable of doing, making sure we're getting the most out of it. If a game is pitched too easy, I wouldn't consider it efficient. So we're actually wasting capacity to learn within the limited training time that we'll have. On the flip side of that, if we pitch it too hard, we'll probably lose valuable information. Right, so we're not actually getting enough, or not giving the players enough space to actually take in what we're telling them, and therefore there's stuff being lost. Players, by their nature, will have to prioritise the cues that they've been given. So if you're given too much, making a game too complicated, all of a sudden they're losing the cues that they need to get. So it's a consideration when you're designing a game or thinking of a conditioned game, is thinking of that bandwidth and thinking about the players. One of the questions that was sent to me prior to starting this related to a different, so games for a specific age group. This is something that bandwidth is so important when you're considering which age group you're working with. You really got to think, what are they capable of doing? A lot of it might not be to do with age. It might just be the group that you have. And part of that is you trying to ascertain that over, might take 1, 2, 3, 4 sessions before you get to the point where I know what these guys are capable of. We might have 2 different levels within a group. I have a group of under 15s at the moment, and we've definitely got 2 different levels within that group. So I have to think about the bandwidth and think about what we're doing with games to make sure that we're actually triggering each person to the right level. So conditioned games, what they allow us to do, and it's manipulation of rules to put an emphasis on a certain aspect of performance. That's what I would see a conditioned game as being. It's manipulation of rules or manipulation of our setup. And I am going to go into a bit more detail on this, and I'm not going to give specific or any major specific details on games, but there will be stuff that we'll throw out there, and it might give you an idea for a game as we go through the next few slides. If we're thinking about why we apply conditions, so we might apply a condition, and the purpose might be we want to emphasize a certain skill or a set of skills. Something very simple. We want to work on our kick passing, right? We're going to play a kick pass only game. It's the only thing we can do. So all of a sudden, everybody has to work on the kick. If the player's in possession of the ball, they have to work on the kick. So that's a very basic level. Increasing or decreasing physical demands, and an example coming up will actually go into that. But it's something used a lot. I'm working with the down football team at the moment. It's something used quite a lot there. So you need to increase physical demands in the game. We have to change some of the conditions. Or if we want to deload something, we'll maybe change some of the physical demands by changing some of the conditions. To develop an element of tactical play. So one that I see used quite a lot is something to do with your counter-attacking. Or your transition play, as it's now become known. But whenever you want to develop an awareness of tactical play, either offensively or defensively, you can bring in conditions that try to emphasize that. So a big part of it as well is rewarding the play and the desired behavior. So if players are doing something that you want them to do, making sure that's rewarded within the game. Again, a couple of examples coming up where we'll talk through that and give an idea around that. Penalising unwanted aspects of play, and I'm not a big believer in the idea that we don't necessarily, we definitely don't punish, but we can still have penalties or penalise aspects of play. So that might be within a game. If a certain thing happens, your team lose possession of the ball. So you're replicating something that might happen in a game. You know what? If you're not disciplined in this situation, you will lose possession of the ball. So the idea of penalising, I still wouldn't completely rule it out. You have to have that in there. You have to have an understanding of consequences of poor play. And a key one at underage, it's increasing opportunities for players to be involved. So as an analyst, some people have asked me, what sort of performance analysis would you do with an under-12 team? Sometimes you cringe when you hear the question. Other times you think, you know what, you could do elements of it. And when I heard myself saying that, I was thinking, oh, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. But something as simple as, you know what, I've got wee Johnny there. I'm borrowing that term from Tony Scullion, who always talked about wee Johnny. But I've got wee Johnny here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my eye on him over the course of this session. and I'm going to keep account of the number of times he gets his hands on the ball over the course of this session tonight, just to get an idea of how often a player does actually get on the ball, how many opportunities they get to learn on the ball, as well as what to do off the ball. But you can condition a game to give more opportunity for players to actually get on and have more ball contact. So what can we manipulate within our games? And the 5 things that I threw out, or I will throw out as part of this session, and I don't think this is exhaustive. I think there's probably more, but we can manipulate the playing rules, which I'm sure most people will think that's their default. We're going to change our rules. You know, the one that everybody will use might be we're playing a match, but it's one touch. You're allowed one shoulder or one bounce to get out of trouble. I hear that. I don't think there's a training session I've been at where that hasn't been brought into at some stage for some reason. My bugbear with that is that it has to be for a reason. At times we see players getting into, you actually work a player into 50 yards of space, and then they're constrained by this one touch rule where they can only take one shoulder bounce, and then they're stood in space, which is what we want to do with players in a game, get the ball in space, but then they're stood not able to do anything and have to play a risky pass. So you've got to think about the rule you're putting in and how that actually affects the play. The pitch size, so we can manipulate pitch size, absolutely. We can manipulate team numbers, so we can add players in, take players out, and that would be one that would be used quite a lot with trying to increase ball contacts. So we'll go to smaller sided games. We might have 4 or 5 smaller sided games running across the pitch, but within that if it's only 3 a side or 4 a side, every player is going to have to be involved. A big one is the scoring rules, and that's when it comes back to a previous point we talked about reward and desired behaviour. Your scoring rules can and should reward that behaviour. So if behaviour, we'll go back to the kick passing one. It's a great game I've seen that Tony would have done in the past, where we looked at a 30 metre kick pass was enough to get a score. So a 30 metre kick pass on the folder with one bounce was a point to that team that got that pass. And that was as part of a complete full game, but that also scored within a game. That was to encourage that use of the pass. Time constraints is another one. And I will come to an example now in a minute where we can use time constraints to try and affect a change that we want to get out of players. So the table that I've got up is something I probably only put this together for this for this presentation, but it's something that I use, probably not as formally as this, but it's a process I would go through working from left to right. So on the very left, it's right, what is the desired outcome I want to get from a conditioned game? And we'll not worry too much about the examples I have in this because I am going to flick through some of them now. But the desired outcome on the far left, your next step is, right, what is the rule change we're going to make? Or what is the condition that we're going to put in place? What are the potential benefits of it? So apart from hitting our desired outcome, are there other potential benefits of putting that condition in? And one thing that I feel, on my experience, is a lot of people neglect. They neglect to look at this side of it, the potential pitfalls. So what could putting this rule change in, what other aspects of play might this allow us to neglect or maybe exploit other weaknesses? So I think having a consideration in your head beforehand of these potential pitfalls. Players are quite sharp and quite cute, and whenever you bring in conditions, it only usually takes 3 or 4 minutes before some person will start to exploit a rule somewhere. So you always need to have a wee backup to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I will move to a couple of examples now, and they're all in that table format. So they're in that table format purely because it's highlighting that process that I would go through. So if we think of how we manipulate pitch size, right, what's the desired outcome? We want to keep control of possession in tight situations or through packed defences. Very, very simple. We can reduce pitch size to half. There you go. We've manipulated the pitch size, but we've maintained the playing number. So all of a sudden, you've got you might have 30 players operating in half the pitch, and I'm basing this on a full 15v15. But obviously, if you're playing, if you have 8v8 in training, you adjust the pitch size accordingly. But you try to get it to the point that replicates. If we're at 15v15 at intercounty level, that's not too far off trying to play it through a pack defence. So, you know, at a stage in the game when an opponent decides to shut down and you have to try and work through them, that will replicate that. What are the other benefits of it? There'll be increased physical contact on and off the ball. So you're getting that element of intensity and the physical contact, getting players used to that whenever they're in contact with the ball. The game will demand very quick movement of possession. Right, so they will have to move the ball quickly. They'll not have time to dwell on it. And it should develop an ability to create and exploit space. So trying to work with others in their team to create the space and to exploit it. The potential pitfalls of this is quite, you know, it's probably quite well known. Whenever you go into a very tight situation, tight space, you know what's going to happen. Inevitably, there'll be poor tackling. Because of this increased physical contact, it will result in poor or overzealous tackling where players maybe discipline, the tackle goes out, or 2 or 3 people get round one player and the tackling just isn't of the right quality. It can also relate, so if we think about quick movement of possession, it'll result in poor quality of passing owing to increased pressure. So if there's more pressure, the quality of the pass is likely to drop. But the caveat to that is that's probably the purpose of what you're trying to do. Not get poor passing, but you're trying to get players used to moving the ball quicker. So in certain situations where there might be a pitfall, where a game might look messy and scrappy, that's almost what you want to do at the first play of a game. You want it to look scrappy because there is learning to be done there. And that is where you need to be patient. So instead of going changing the game, that's where you need to actually start coaching it. And coaching, right, with player movement, coach maybe this third element. You know, how do we create and exploit space? How do we use that space? How do we find space? So there's things that got pitfalls that you need to think of, and you need to be aware that they're coming within that game. I know that passing is going to be scrappy and it's going to be poor at the outset, but we want to see improvement. It's a really important thing to consider with your games is just because something looks bad first time out doesn't mean it's a bad game. It's probably an indication that it's actually a really good game. So to move on then, so if we look at how do we adapt team numbers. So again, I've already alluded to this. We want to increase the volume of ball contacts per player, and we want to maybe increase their anaerobic capacity. So we want to get that wee bit of extra running in them. And this is something that can be applied at probably from any age, just to get that wee bit extra running into the legs. And it's not running for the sake of running. It's trying to get that wee bit more intensity into their play and get them thinking about how they really need support play. So, for example, reduce to 4v4. And after playing a pass, the passer must accelerate outside the pitch. So if we've got a 4v4 grid set up in a 40 steps by 60 steps area, it's quite a big area for them. But after the play a pass, they must accelerate to somewhere on the outside, and it's only whenever they re-enter can they actually be active again that they can be used. So essentially what you're doing is as soon as a team is in possession, they're essentially 3 people against 4, because they're more than likely always going to have a player having to run to get out before they can get back in again. You know, other potential benefits of that get you used to maybe playing against an extra man, because you more or less do have only 3 players for a lot of that. Playing against an extra man, thinking of the creative movement, so thinking of a player as they come back into the grid, how can they change the angle of their run? Where can they go that's of most benefit to their opponent or to their own team? Do they have to go straight in to support the ball, or can they go somewhere else which is going to drag somebody out of position? And defensively, for the team not in possession, getting used to dealing with a late runner or someone coming unmarked that they haven't actually picked up or haven't seen. So trying to get that communication, and for both teams, communication in that game is vital. Potential pitfalls, we end up developing this situation where a player's holding possession while they're waiting for support. That, strictly speaking, shouldn't happen if you've still got two other teammates supporting you. So it is a pitfall where you could have someone standing on a spot solo and maybe waiting for someone to come in, but we do see that in the game. And what you're trying to do then is trying to not eliminate it, but try to reduce the amount that has to happen by improving the runs of the other 2 players supporting them, the re-entry run of the player coming back in. To move on to scoring rules, so I already alluded to this one too, so the use of a long kick pass. So we want to start using more long kick passing to maintain and progress possession. Now, the example I already talked about was where we just have a game and a 30-yard kick pass or a 30-meter kick pass gets us a score. So something else you can do, you could actually put within a pitch large scoring zones, if you want to call them that. So it could be a full match again, but you might actually have large scoring zones. It might be something as simple as inside the 45 if we're playing a game. I'm basing it all on full sort of 15v15 stuff. But if you're playing across a pitch, you might just have an inside 15-meter line. So if we can get a kick pass into that area, it's going to be a 1-point score to the team that receives it. So that should encourage delivery of accurate ball. Other potential benefits: offensively, the movement of players. So you're going to have players moving there to get space to be able to play that pass. And defensively, you've got to think about where the danger is. So players and teams have got to be thinking, right, well, where's the scoring zone? Where can they do damage to us? And again, communication within that game too. The pitfall, excuse me, a defensive team will automatically gravitate to defend the scoring zone. So as soon as you start to see that happening, even if it starts from the outset, introduce another condition or another rule. Okay, if a team maintains possession for 1 minute, that's a score. So you're sort of encouraging the opposition team to come out to try and gain possession of the ball and not let them get that full minute. It doesn't have to be a minute. It could be 20 seconds. It could be 30 seconds. But again, it's just bringing in another rule to try and take that potential pitfall out of it. There are other things you could do to counter, zonal defense. You can state very clearly you want, player-on-player defense. You don't want zonal defense. And that's a case of blowing the whistle and stopping it if you see zonal defense developing. So just being aware of what's going on as the game develops. Our time constraints. So how can we manipulate time constraints? And the one I have here is the counter-attacking and pace. So we want to try and really encourage a team, if we win the ball in our own defensive area, we want to get that ball up the pitch as soon as possible. I always equate a counter-attack or a transition as it's basically a foot race. It's a straight foot race between the team that have just won the ball and the team that have just lost it, to see who can get up to that far end of the pitch quicker. If it's the attacking team, the chances are they're getting a shot away very quickly. If the defensive team get there, we're going to find them getting into recycling of the play, or else we're going to turn the ball over again. So we want to improve that counter-attacking. Simulate a turnover ball. So you can be standing there with the ball, just throw it to the defensive team. As soon as they get the ball in hand, clock's on. They have 20 seconds to get inside the far 45. And again, you don't have to do this 45 to 45. This could be, you could operate between the 21 and the 45 on a fairly narrow track in a 3v3 or a 4v4 situation where they've got 10 seconds to get across the line. But it's basically team v team. One is focused on keeping them out, and the other is focused on getting in beyond the line. But putting those time constraints on to try and encourage that pace, that attacking. It's very similar to introducing a shot clock in a game. When you gain possession of the ball, you've got 30 seconds to get your shot away, and you're encouraging that real quick, pacey play. So the other benefits can create a better understanding from a defensive point of view how to counter quick counter-attacks. So team positioning, how do we set up? If we lose the ball, where do we need to get to? So if a team lose the ball inside the far 14 and we need to stop them getting inside the 45, what sort of position does the team need to take up? What sort of shape do we need to take up? It also encourages good stops. So maybe a good tackle or a solid tackle early that's going to slow it up and allow teammates to get back. I'm not going to say a good foul early, but it's a good attempt at a tackle. It may result in a foul. It slows it up. Teammates can get back. So thinking of those other benefits, and the biggest benefit in that sort of game is actually how to defend it probably. The pitfalls, again, we add speed pressure. We're going to add sloppy skills. Okay, so making sure the time scale is realistic, that it's not a case of they get the ball and they have to hit a 60-yard pass to be in with a hope of getting there. Keep the time scale realistic, that you're going to allow for that good play to develop, good passing, good crisp passing. What you'd find with that one, 20 seconds to get to the far 45-meter line, you're probably thinking that's fair enough, and that actually allows for good, clean, crisp hand passing running off the shoulder. Maybe a good kick pass to advance further. That's probably fair in 20 seconds. What you'll find within that, if there's one breakdown or one hand pass that goes astray, that 20 seconds probably not achievable. So it can be a pitfall, but that can encourage the good practice, and that's where you try to bring that into play. So I'm going to move on a wee bit from those examples of how we do it. And I'm just going to try and hit those again. There's a couple of questions sent beforehand, which I am going to try and address here now. First one was getting your message across. How do you ensure the game gets a message across? And I've probably alluded to this already as we go through, but it's rewarding the right behaviour. So a game has to reward the right behaviour, and for me, the best way to do that is create a scoring mechanism that rewards what you want to see. So if it's when you play a pass, you must go and take the return off the shoulder, and make yourself available for the return off the shoulder. Give them a point for that. Every time you see that happen, give them a point. You might be counting very high numbers very quickly, but it only has to happen once before you've got that point across. That's what you need to do. And then the flip side of that, right? We're not gonna award a point, but what we're going to do is every time you don't do it, we're going to take a point off you or give a point to the opposition. So every time you don't, so you're encouraging that right behaviour. I've already talked about the kick passing one. If we're trying to encourage that long kick pass inside, as soon as the kick pass played inside, there you go. There's a point before you even get to go for your score. Also, being vocal and getting your message across. Be vocal when something's done well. So whenever you see what you want to see and you see the improvement or the behaviour you want to see, making sure you're letting them know that. And if that takes blowing the whistle, stop, everybody stop. Did everybody see what happened there? That's what we need. That's what we're trying to get to. Everybody else will need to be starting to do the same sort of thing. So making sure you're really emphasising when it's done properly. And don't be afraid to stop the game. As I said there, don't be afraid to stop it when you see. Make sure they understand why something is good. Or if someone has missed something or missed an opportunity to do what you really want them to do, blow the whistle, stop it. And I had a session last night actually under 15s, and I blew the whistle, stopped it at one stage. The player had got the ball from a bit of a ruck on the right hand side of the pitch. They got it at the point at the back, if you want to call it quarterback position. They got it there, and their first reaction was to run back into it. And I just blew the whistle and stopped it. Told everybody to stop the wire, and I told the player on the ball, look left, and the 2 free players further left. It's like, when I blow the whistle, play starts where you are the ball. Blew the whistle and they moved it left. So stop it, point it out, and let them go from there. So don't be afraid to just blow the whistle and stop it and correct it there and then. Coaching across the different age grades. So I'll re-emphasize the bandwidth message. The mental capacity, so what stage are they at? What stage are they at with the skills that they're trying to work on? If they're in the really early stages of skills, again, using kick pass as an example, say the really early stages of it, lower age grades, maybe where they're struggling even with distance, to get the ball off the deck. Something as simple, I think in Ulster GA, maybe the schools coaches would correct me on this, but there's a game they called Cross the River. It's basically, you've got a channel, which is a river. It might be 10, 15, 20 yards wide, and you've got one player on each side of it, and they're just kicking across that channel to each other. It's paired up. It's a game because all you're asking them to do is count every pass that they get to stay dry. So every pass they make across the river that doesn't end up in the river, count that. Let them go for a minute and ask them how much they got. Okay, we're going to go again. We want you to try and improve that. Really think about what you need to improve. You need to strike through that ball. You need to make sure you follow through on the ball and get that length into it. So it can be as simple as that for right down to the underage grades. But remembering the bandwidth, not giving them too many messages, keeping it as simple as possible if that's where they need it to be. Big pitfall of conditioned games that I've seen is overcomplication. So putting too many conditions on, or too complicated a rule, or a rule, if it's a rule that you have to explain more than twice, I'll give you twice at it. If you have to explain it more than twice, you can be sure it's probably too complicated, and you've already consumed the bandwidth available before they even get into the exercise to look at the drill and to look at the actual skill that you're trying to develop. And that's basically all it is. Players will become more concerned about the rules than they do about the skill or the tactical element that you're trying to develop. So I would sort of make that rule for myself. If I explain it once and a player needs clarification on it, that's okay. If we need clarification 3 and 4 times, then it becomes a bit of an issue that maybe I've pitched this one too high. Let's take an element of that out. But just avoid falling into that. For me, 1, 2, maximum 3 rules within a game that change it from what we're used to in terms of our full game and our full rules. But ideally, keep it to 1 or 2 rules. And usually one of them is the scoring rule. So you'll have a scoring rule, and then it might be another condition around that. How much time do you spend on conditioned games in a session? And if you think back to one of the very first slides I had on with the continuum on it, So at far left, we had our sort of very basic standalone technical skills, thinking of James McCarthy kicking off the wall. That sort of thing we don't really do a lot of within a game. You definitely don't. Well, maybe you'll do a little bit in the warm-up within a training session. You might, again, at a lower age grade, you'll probably do some straight line stuff or more closed drills where it literally is just, you don't worry about any rules, you just worry about focus on the pass, focus on the execution of the skill, focus on the toe tap, whatever it is. And you just get them to do that as part of it. But as I said, even going back to that previous example of the cross the river, even bringing in little games like that, that's all conditioned games. And for me, conditioned games probably, I would look at it probably constituting 80% of my session. And the reason I'm saying that, I think back to that very first thing, what is a game? And amusement or fun. You've got to have players going away, having enjoyed it, having had an element of enjoyment and fun, especially at underage, but even up to senior level. It was an absolute bugbear of mine at senior level. When I was playing at senior level, we'd turn up and there was very little opportunity to develop skills or develop anything you were doing game-wise. Because you'd end up in straight line drills, you'd end up doing just, the ball was gone and you were doing running. So to me, 80% of what you're doing is conditioned games. There's not really a right or wrong answer, but what I would say on this, and this is something I pulled together that I think is worth looking at and worth thinking of when you're doing a conditioned game. First question you have to ask, are the players enjoying it? If they are, okay, is the game having the desired effect? If it is the issue we're trying to work on still relevant? And if the answer to all those is yes, keep it going. Absolutely no need to stop it because they're enjoying it, it's working, and we still need to work on it. So keep going. Are they enjoying it? If the answer to that is no, bin it, move on, or change it, change something up on it. But I would argue that 90% of the games that you will ever develop, or the conditioned games you'll develop, players will enjoy it so long as it's at the right level, so long as you don't fire too many conditions at them. So long as they're getting the opportunity to actually score and get something out of it. And so long as you are making it, to a point competitive, if it's competitive with themselves or competitive with, their partner or whoever it might be, or competitive in a team setting, they probably will be enjoying it. If they're not, that's it. You revise it or you move on. If they're enjoying it, is it having the effect? If it's not having the effect, you probably need to check something. You probably need to revise something as well. Okay, if it is having the effect, but it's not relevant, so we're working on that kick passing drill, on that kick passing game, and the players have really got it. You know what? We're actually doing really well in that from that point of view, but something else is now an issue. There's no point continuing that kick passing drill or that kick passing game. So let's change it up or move on to the next thing. So I've one more slide, and it's literally a thanks for listening slide, but I've probably a couple of points that I want to re-emphasize before I would sum up or before I open it up to questions. To me, conditioned games are all about improving the efficiency of your sessions. So we've got limited enough time with players as it is. If we isolate skills, if we isolate elements of tactical play, and we try to work on them as part of a session, we'll end up not having enough sessions, just not having enough time to get through stuff. Like in a drill-based session, you're getting exposure to practice and practicing those skills, the technicalities of skills, but there's no physical pressure, there's no decision-making pressure, there's no energy expenditure pressure in a lot of them. So they're maybe doing it where they're feeling quite relaxed, they're not under any pressure or heavy breathing or tired legs, and then you throw them into a game and all of a sudden they have to do it whenever they're like that. And I'll go back again, 8 or 9 years working with Tony, you started to hear a lot of this stuff when we sat in the office, but he always talked about wee Johnny. Why could wee Johnny stand at training and he could kick 15 out of 15 over off his left and right foot standing right in front of goal when you were doing a shooting drill, but when you went into a game wee Johnny couldn't score because wee Johnny never practiced under pressure. And that's where the conditioned games allow you to do that. They're probably conditioned games are the most closely related in terms of physical activity to full games, depending on how you set up your game. But they're probably at that level. People will talk about a holistic approach to describe like a backroom team or whatever it is, your preparation and your team pulling together. I would talk about holistic approach in terms of your training. So you're bringing in technical, physical, tactical, mental, emotional. Try to bring all that in, package them together into whatever you're doing in a conditioned game. It doesn't have to be all 5 of them, or if there might be more than that, but it doesn't have to be all of them. But let's try and make sure we want to work on a technical skill, right? Let's try and get an element of physical into that too, or let's try and get an element of physical and tactical into it at the same time to get them to work on it. Use your warm up, or use the tail end of your warm up to do any real closed line drills. So if you want them doing a bit of kick passing, get them just doing a bit of kick passing at the end of a warm up or at the start of a warm up, even to get their eye in, and then you move to the conditioning games thereafter. So to me, conditioning games are all about efficiency. If you can do conditioning games for 80% of your sessions, I suppose is probably what I said, you will be getting maximum efficiency out of your sessions. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm going to invite any questions. I'm going to stop sharing the presentation screen. So I've got the video on screen and people can hopefully see me a bit more that way. And I will open up the questions, which I think are invited through the chat bar. Forgive me, I haven't actually seen the chat bar, so there may be questions in there. And I think Paul will maybe facilitate if there is questions. So thank you very much for listening, folks.
Okay, Kevin, thanks very much. I'm a big believer in myself and condition games. I use them a good part of any session I'm involved in. I think they're fantastic. You do go to training sessions and people do like playing the game at the end, like, or the game at the start. But condition games is the way to break down any issues you have, or any concerns you have with your team or any positions. And I'm a big believer in it myself, so that explains it a lot more detail there than even for my benefit. A few questions come in there, and if anyone wants to ask a question, maybe you can raise your hand and I can bring you in live, or if not, use the chat bar. So maybe just very, very slightly off topic, but it's still a part of the topic, Kevin, is we always heard about windows of opportunity, and children should be doing certain things at a certain age group to develop a certain skill. And in the past, players and coaches have maybe for getting players to use their weaker side or non-dominant foot or non-dominant hand, maybe put on different colored socks or something. Is there any stats or any surveys out there to see what if a child doesn't get comfortable using his foot at a certain age group, they won't use it? Have you come across any of that? Say, for instance, is there an age group where a child, if they haven't used their weaker foot by a certain age, they'll lose it, they won't use it in the game situation?
It's not something that I can think of offhand. I actually I've been doing stuff recently where I've actually been looking at that bilateral transfer, so left right and the left right balance. It's obviously some of the work I've been doing is at senior level, so that's where it's based. But as part of that research, I was looking at stuff even through into Australian rules footballs, and there was some soccer studies that were involved, and it was fairly evident that there is, even at those elite levels, and the soccer studies were based on World Cups and stuff like that. So it was high end, and it was AFL stuff, and there was disparity between strong side and weak side in terms of ability to execute skills under pressure. So in terms of your specific question about the age group and when they need to do it, I don't have an answer to that, but what I would say is it's still very evident at elite level, even today's day and age, that there is disparity at the top level, and that's something that can only be influenced. It can't, like, today's generation that people playing at senior level now are essentially lost to that, so it has to happen. It has to happen as part of the underage development and trying to make that, the left right balance something that becomes second nature to players.
Yeah, I still think there's a certain age group, maybe it could be worked. I know, slightly off topic, Shea Given went to Celtic at 16, and with a back pass, he couldn't use his left foot at all. He's all right footed the whole time. So they just totally concentrated on his left foot. And when he became up, in the first team with whatever Blackburn or Man City, he's quite comfortable both feet. It just shows you at 16 he could only use one foot. So there's still that opportunity even later on, right, if you do concentrate it. Just maybe another question here. Coaches maybe play a game on Saturday or Sunday over the weekend. How many coaches do you think they should devise their condition games relevant to the game at the weekend?
The upcoming game or the previous game?
The previous game, both maybe. Sometimes things go wrong in a game and they just move on to do the same thing they're always doing instead of maybe concentrating on maybe what went wrong or trying to improve
Yeah.
what went wrong the previous weekend? Are you any
You're
thoughts on
at
that?
risk of opening a rabbit hole for me here, Paul.
Right.
Look, I'm pulling on my performance analysis hat and stepping out of the coaching ring for a second. From performance analysis perspective, to me, every session that you're doing should have some basis or some grounding in your previous performance. You know, an element of that might be, you know, you're looking at your basic game stats. You might not even look at stats. It might be, and performance analysis can just be your observations and your visual of what you got from the game. But your next session should absolutely be addressing something that you've seen as being a weakness, or, you know, I suppose if you think about it on the basis of, you might have some people here might operate 2 training sessions a week. A lot of others might only operate 1. But if you've 2 training sessions a week, the way I would operate would be, the first training session is, right, we're going to try and address things that we weren't quite up to speed on last week, and that's going to be the focus of our session. We're going to try and improve that. And the second one, if you're in a position to know what the opposition are like and you want to prepare for that, right, we're going to try and prepare for what we're going to have to deal with against them. At underage, that's not a thing. So at underage, that whole week's training, both those sessions, if you're lucky enough to have 2 sessions, become all about, let's work on the things we need to improve. It's not necessarily just things you need to improve. It might be the things that are relevant to how you want to play the game. You know, so there's no point in working on a long kick pass game into the full forward line if you don't have any, you know, players in the full forward line that are going to be receiving that type of ball. If you're going to be playing maybe a more of a running game, short hand pass and supporting off the shoulder, then that's what you need to work on. But yeah, look, I think, to me, from a PA point of view, absolutely every session should have some sort of grounding in what happened in the game before.
Right. Good stuff. How important is to stop or to explain what you're going to do, like what the reason you're doing it? I think you touched on it, but how important is it, you know, for people to understand why they're doing a conditioning game? So,
to me, it's part of the intro to the game. Is they have to understand before they go out to do it the first time. They have to understand what you're trying to do. A lot of the times, what I'll actually do is I will explain the rules, or explain the rule or the condition that I'm putting on it, and then I'll actually ask the question. First, does everybody understand? Yes. Right. Does anybody understand why we're doing this? And try and tease it from the players to see if they actually, because a lot of times, and again, at the moment I'm working with an under 15 group, and a lot of times when you ask that question, they know straight away what you're trying to get at. You know, so they'll know from the condition that you're putting on, which shows that they're already at that stage where they understand the game, they understand what has to be done. So them understanding before they go out into that drill or that game for the first time, absolutely, I think they need to understand what you're trying to address on it and the reason for doing it.
Would you recommend whole and then put the condition game into maybe what was weak in the first game? So if you started with a game, your training session, and maybe things weren't going to plan regarding maybe handling or pickup or long kick or whatever, and then devising your condition game around what went wrong at the start of the game, and then hopefully it improves in the last part of the game.
Yeah, like I would tend to take that approach even within a condition game. So if you want to call the actual condition game the whole game, so, you know, we're not starting with a full-on game, but we're starting with the condition game. And if I see something developing within that, it sort of goes back to that having preempting the pitfalls. So seeing what's potentially going to happen and having something else in place that we're going to then, I'm going to put that in place to see how to cope with that, or to try and negate this thing that's starting to develop within it. You know, I was a wee bit naive probably a couple of weeks ago, where I brought in, because one of the things with the under 15 lads, wanted to try and encourage them to moving the ball to space and staying out of contact. So the rule was fairly simple. If the player on the ball is touched by their opponent, they have to sit the ball down and they get turned over, which was grand until at one stage one of the players on the opposing team, boy, picked up the ball and he literally just pushed him in the back, and I was like, oh, there's a pitfall, because they think they don't actually have to tackle or try to tackle properly. So then it was just rethinking, right, well, how do we make sure that doesn't happen? You can obviously tell them they're not allowed to foul, but it was trying to just clarify that rule a wee bit. But, you know, yeah, breaking it down is something I would do quite regularly. Where you change it up, where you try and change it up just to re-emphasize a certain element of what they're trying to do. Yeah, so the whole thing you definitely use. It's probably, you probably use it without realising you're doing it.
Okay,
If you know what I mean.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, just a couple of questions in the chat. There's two here. So just from Eddie, would you consider changing the shape of the pitch to maybe oval, hexagon, etc., making the players think about the positioning?
Yeah, it's not something I've done, and to be honest with you, it's probably not something I've done because of the hassle it would be putting out cones. Trying to define where the pitch is. I for a lot of what I do try to use lines on the pitch that are already there. So you're using areas that are in the pitch, and you usually have to put cones down somewhere, but trying to use end line to 45, or it might be between the two 45s or whatever it is, but you're using the lines that are already on the pitch. I'm sort of caught in this position of I don't want to be a cone setter down. I don't want to be out throwing 30 or 40 cones down before a training session. So I try to use what's there in terms of pitch outlines, pitch guidelines. But if we want to constrain areas, then yes, we'd do it. I would generally keep the pitch shape the same, but might have areas within the pitch that are different. So, for example, the scoring zone. People talk about the scoring zone, and a lot of people will do an arc around the goals. But if we think about that, a scoring zone actually should circle back in front of the goals. If it's an arc in the goals, you don't want anyone kicking anything from the end line, 20 or 30 yards from the goal post on the end line. So that's not, strictly speaking, the scoring zone. So things like that. There's actually a piece that I've just done recently on the scoring zone, and it defines exactly what that is at senior county level. But that's where I would have constraints around shapes and areas, is on the actual playing area.
Okay, is there any guidelines around how long a game should last, condition games last, and how many you'd have in a session?
Usually I'll look, if you're trying to get a physical result out of the game, as in you want to try and impact on an aspect of physical fitness, or maybe you want to get to that element of anaerobic endurance I was talking about, then maybe yes, you do need to have a time on it. For the most part, I sort of take the physical results of a conditioned game I just take them as they're given. They're going to happen anyway. So I focus really on the gameplay and the learning from the skill point of view or the tactical point of view. And that question, your time, I will start it first time out, and I might only give players 2 minutes at it, and then call them back in. And if they've made 3 or 4 or 5 mistakes that are the thing you're trying to address, it'll be, do we see what we're doing? Do we see what we need to change? And then it'll go. And usually I would find it probably goes 2 minutes, then you'll get into a 3-minute burst, and then you might get into a 5-minute burst, and then you maybe even play 10 minutes of it. You can, as the players start to learn and improve, you don't need to stop it as frequently. But even at that, you can play it for 2 minutes, a quick blow of the whistle, stop. Does everybody see what's happening here? Right, go play. So it's not, I'm not rigid in terms of everything has to be a certain time, or we'll have to play exactly 3 or 4 minutes. I usually only bring that in at the end. Right, we're going to play for a winner here, or we're going to play for 4 minutes solid, and we'll want a winner at the end of it, or whatever it is. It's usually only then that I actually bring in the stopwatch and see what we're doing. Not sure if that answers the question, right? But that's how I would do it.
Just one more question here, just 1 wee second, so you're going to get it. Would you consider at times just putting a condition on a specific player rather than a specific condition for all players, when really just one player who needs improvement in the game? Example,
Absolutely.
one tut. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the sort of thing that I wouldn't necessarily tell that player, or not. Sorry, I would only tell that player. I wouldn't tell the whole team. So maybe take that player to the side and just say to them, "You're in this game. You're not allowed to." That example there. You're only allowed 1 touch. At underage, I know that's a thing that can develop. There's a flip side to that, and there's a flip side to everything. Look, I even heard of a player who last year was told to stop carrying the ball, and I've now got a player who gets the ball in 50 yards of space, perfectly capable of carrying it, and doesn't carry it.
Right.
So we've got to think about what we're trying to do, and I'll get back to that one. Look, the one touch thing is something that. One touch thing is something that as I said, I've heard it from I was no age, and an awful lot of the time, we think about what we're trying to do. We try to get a player into space. You look at inter-county teams, when a player breaks the line and ends up with 50 yards of space in front, and they carry the ball at pace. So to try and discourage that, I don't know if it's always the right thing to do. At times, yes, it has to be done. And that's a really good example of, you know what, we're that one player, bring that into it. Or, you know, an example like that might be that they should be passing it, but they're carrying it into trouble. That, you know, a better condition might be you're not allowed to get touched with the ball. If you have the ball in your hand and you get touched, that's it. It's a turnover. So they can carry it if they're in space, but if they're not in space and they try to carry it, they will be touched. You blow the whistle to turn it over.
Okay, last question here. I think it's from our old colleague Ross Corbett. Any advice on a realistic shot clock duration and a full-sided football game? You understand that?
Thanks for that, Ross. Asking the hard questions.
Maybe Ross wants to come on and I can unmute him, or you will try and answer it yourself there.
Look, a shot clock duration thing, I suppose the easiest way for me to look at that is if I look at all the possessions that we would have on an inter-county basis. You've got probably an average time of a possession is probably, and this is complete ballpark figure, there's no science behind this, but it's probably somewhere around about 30 seconds. So I would just wonder if around 30 seconds is a long enough period. Even if you turn the ball over deep in your cornerback position, is that enough time to get the ball up the pitch and into a scoring position? It absolutely is. The thing about the shot clock being that it probably takes in a lot more risk into the play. We're probably going down another rabbit hole of changes to rules, but that was one that I definitely would have thought they could have strongly considered with some of the stuff that we're talking about doing in football. Would have been a shot clock. Right. But to me, 30 to 40 seconds is probably fair in football.
Right, no problem. Well answered. Awkward question then. Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. That's fantastic and great insight to condition games. I'm sure people will find it very, very beneficial. So that's our last webinar of the sort of this season anyway. Hopefully now everybody's back on the pitch and hopefully things have settled down and we're more on the pitch. Obviously, we might be back online in the future, but hopefully just for practical reasons, not just because we have to do it. Might make more sense. I'm doing some webinars online. So thanks very much for Kevin and everybody for logging in. And as I mentioned earlier, this webinar will be available on the Ulster YouTube channel next few days' time. So thanks very much for everybody for taking part and take care.